I am part of the onboarding team at Easygenerator, right? So essentially what I do is I work with authors every single day to create content that is relevant, right? And I know that we're talking about scaling and we're talking about rapid authoring. Oh yeah, there's still some room. Go ahead. So before we jump into like all of it, I just want to know what comes to your mind when you think about scaling, especially scaling learning.
Localization.
Okay, localization, consistency. Okay. You are, I think, right on the dot, but you're also a lot more optimistic than the people that I speak to, because every time I talk about this, and I was telling this to the other workshop, is people say a lot of or they mention a lot of challenges that come with scaling. So they think about quality, right? They think about, for example, localization, translation. Like it is more kind of like a worry than something that's exciting. So today I want to kind of like think about how we can debunk all of those fears and how we can create something that goes, as the name says, beyond speed, right? Because when you think about scaling, you need to think about relevance as well, right? And today I want to talk about how scaling is not about creating more content, right? I don't want you to go out of this workshop thinking, oh, I have to create like a bunch more courses. I have to create a lot more paths, right? Scaling is about reusing what we already have in a way that's easy for teams, right? But also in a way that's faster and in a way that's smarter. And throughout the workshop, you're going to notice that I'm mentioning a lot of the content you already have because I know you have it, right? And you know that that content exists too. There's a whole, let's say, hidden learning ecosystem that goes beyond what we can create as learning and development, right? So how are we using that learning ecosystem to create something that's useful for us and also useful for the people that take courses, right? So I want to bring essentially an idea of what I think most of the learning and development teams look like. So when we think about how we create content, we essentially think about kind of like an assembly line, right? And you can see that here. So you have the SME, the subject matter experts. They have all of the content. They do their jobs every day, right? They know all of the tips and tricks, all that stuff. They come to L&D with an idea, right? They say, okay, yeah, I want to create a training on this and this and this. And then they essentially run that idea through you. You say, amazing, that's a great initiative. And you start working on it. You spend months or weeks, if we're optimists, creating content that makes sense, creating content that reflects what happens in real life, so on. Then you go through rounds and rounds and rounds of approvals through a lot of different people that have to like give their okay to create this. And then maybe months later, you're going to have that training rolling out, right? The thing is, by that time, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right on 99% of the cases, people are already going to create their own trainings, right? They're not going to wait for your e-learning to come out. They're already going to have an email that they go back to every single day and they have it like pinned in the beginning of their mailbox. You're going to have a PDF that someone developed with the steps that they need to follow, right? So by the time we have the e-learning, by the time we have that structured training, it's not going to be relevant anymore, right? And I know that happens to most of us. So what can we do if we really want to scale? That is kind of like a difficult question, because then you think about scaling and you think, okay, do I need like an army of L&D? Do I need to like outsource most of what I do? Like, what can I do, right? So what I offer, or what I want to share as a model that could help us with scaling is, and you can imagine this with me, it's a world where L&D is more like an editor, more like a curator, more like a coach, right? And you're not going to be kind of like the gatekeeper of knowledge, because let's be real, we are not the ones that have that knowledge. We're not the ones that know how to use that information. We already have people in the business that do that. So why are we not being more like the bridge that kind of like binds that content together and allows that content to be more impactful, right? And if we're doing this, and we're going to talk about this later, but if we're doing something that allows us to have more time, then we can be more strategic and we can start thinking about things that really matter when it comes to training. Because I know that most of us spend our time creating and creating and creating and, filled out with requests, but then we don't have the time to think about metrics, for example. We don't have the time to think about real world applications of our knowledge and the training that we're making. So we want to bring this kind of like beyond what we're able to build as a small or even a big L&D team. So this is what we're going to be exploring today, because I know that also when people see this, they always look at me like a little bit like this, because they always think about, again, more challenges. So for example, if you allow your SMEs to build, most of the times, again, the question that comes to mind the most is quality, right? How am I ensuring that my SMEs create something that makes sense? How do I make sure that that content is actually scalable, right? How is this not like a boring PowerPoint that's going to have like 50 slides and then, a question at the end? So we are going to talk about all of those strategies, but essentially the most important thing that you do as L&D to ensure that you can essentially transform your content creation strategy is you're going to equip your subject matter experts. They're not going to do this on their own. They can't, right? Also, this is not their job. So we are thinking about ways in which we're going to think or change how they think about content. There's guardrails that you're going to put in place for them. There's guides, there's templates that you're going to create for them that are going to allow them to think about strategy, to think about objectives instead of steps, right? And there's ways to do this. Of course, they've already created PowerPoints, they've already created PDFs, but we're talking about structured learning. So we have to take an active role. We don't have to be like the complete content developers, but we do have to have an active role to make sure that this actually happens and to make sure that this is actually effective. So we have ways of doing this, right? And I actually have an example for you, which is something that happened to me when I was developing this workshop. I normally run coaching sessions for authors. So I had a coaching session with an author that had, he was a safety manager at his company, and they have offices. They also have like production facilities. So he had a lot on his plate when it comes to safety. He had a 60-slide presentation that he brought to the session. And he was like, okay, I want to make this into an e-learning. Where do we start? Right? He was like, okay, how can I make it more interactive? Can I add, voiceover to it? And I was like, wait, like people are not going to take this. Because it's true. Like if you share something that's that long, if you share something that, is not going to be as relevant for everyone, then maybe people are going to start it, but they're not going to finish it, right? And we do have to think about completion. So what happened was he had a checklist that his L&D team created for him, or for everyone that wanted to create a course in Easygenerator. And we pulled out that checklist, and it had a lot of like very good questions that reflect why we create training. So he had, for example, a question about his audience. So who's this for, right? What do I need people to do when they finish this training? What are the situations in which they're going to be using this information? And I know that we already think about this when we create courses as learning and development. But then being able to kind of like move this knowledge into a subject matter expert, he was actually able to create 2 trainings out of this, of course, shorter than 60 slides. And one of them was like basic safety, right? And he created this for everyone in an office. So that meant people in different locations than him, right? So that was one way to scale. And then he created like a, let's say, advanced module about like chemical safety, which was for like production, this production side of his company. So out of that very long document that no one finished, we created 2 high quality courses that were, again, reproduced for like more locations than just his own. And the thing is, in the beginning, he was so mad at me when I said that we couldn't make this into an e-learning, because he thought that he couldn't and that we couldn't summarize safety which I get, right? But at the same time, he had the expertise, but he also had the guidelines that L&D created for him. And then with those guidelines, just with the first question, like, who is this for? Then he was like, maybe the people in the office don't have to know about chemical hazards. And I was like, yeah, maybe. So just with that, we were able to kind of split this through, and it just made a little bit more sense. So the L&D team was not present at all, right? But they created something that people could fall back into, and something that could be useful, not only for this guy, but for everyone that wanted to make a course with them, right? So we had that going for us, but we also used AI. And I want to make a stop here, and I want to bring this into the conversation. I know that everything we hear, lately is AI, but I want to know if we're already using AI to create courses. Raise your hands, raise your hands. Okay, some people do, some people don't. Okay, good. So I'm asking this because we think that AI can really change the way that people receive content, but also the way that they create content. And especially if you want to scale up your, let's say, content creation system or your learning system, you really have to use all the tools that are available. So, for example, with this guy, what we did was we used AI to simplify the content that he already had, because it was really complex. But then if I'm just getting started with safety, if it's my first week at the company and I don't understand what we do yet, then it's not going to make sense for me, right? And the thing is, and this happens with most experts, they fall into, let's say, the everything's important trap, right? And another trap, which is having to explain things with the most complicated terms ever. Right? Yeah, I know it happens. I know it happens every single day. So if we can use AI to accelerate the parts that slow us down as humans, then that's also going to help us scale, right? And we don't have to do anything complicated. We can use AI, for example, to, create interactivity out of something, right? For example, it's really hard for people to create categories out of things, but then if AI can help creating kind of like a category game that I can put into my e-learning, then why not, right? And if it comes from the content that people already create, they've already shared, then we're going to ensure that it's still relevant, but it's just going to be nicer to take, right? It's going to be a little bit more fun. So that is how we think about, for example, incorporating AI into content creation. It's not meant to automate, and this is very important, because in the end, if you rely on AI creating content for you, it's not going to be as relevant, right? What we want to do is we want to use the expertise that already exists in the organization, right? That's why we don't have, AI building, courses from scratch and then to up to 100%. But if you can have AI, for example, simplify a document that one SME already built, and then you can also use it to create the, interactivity points that I was mentioning. And then you can use it to create relevant questions that come, again, from the same content. And you can use it, and actually I'm going to jump a slide because I'm talking about this. You can use AI, for example, to translate. And then you can use AI for accessibility purposes, to include closed captions and to include, voiceover. Why not? Right? So we're not thinking about AI as a way to change what people are already sharing, because we also think that we have to, let's say, meet people where they're at. So you're not going to create this new, AI generated training, and you're not going to expect people to go and find it and say, oh, this is exactly what I was looking for. Because what we need to make to actually scale content is what you get, or the feeling that you get when you're lost and you ask your colleague for help, right? You're getting something that's fast. You're getting something that's exactly what you need in terms of how relevant it is, because they understand your question perfectly, because they've worked, with the system before. They know what you're talking about. And also you're getting something that's, informal enough. So that is the bar that we have to clear. And that's not something that we're going to do when we use AI to, generate content. But that is something that we do when we use AI to accelerate content creation and to scale content creation through all of these things. Right? This is how we've incorporated AI, for example, at Easygenerator, to make sure that SMEs can actually use it. and that they're not afraid of it, and that, they can get something out of it. So these are just a couple of ways to, again, incorporate AI into content creation. Now, it's not all about AI, right? It's actually about your team. AI is just going to be a tool. So we know by now, I hope, that including employees into our content creation process is going to have a lot of benefits. It is going to make it easier for us. It's going to make it faster for us to create. It's going to make it maybe a little bit less expensive to create. And it's also going to be way easier to maintain. When we give people the ownership of creating content, then they're going to want to, try and keep it available. They're going to try and want to keep it, easy to access. They're going to try and keep it, relevant. And that's what we need. So the thing is, when we don't, and again, maybe this has happened to you, when we don't incorporate SMEs into the content creation process, we end up with those documents that I was mentioning, right? We have the PDFs on one side, the Google Slides on another side. We have emails with information that's revised and revised and revised. And then you normally have 7 versions of the same information going through your organization, and no one knows what's updated. So it happens, right? If you're struggling with that, then allowing your SMEs to get or to take that ownership really solves that problem. And it's something that we found to be super successful. So maybe try it out, right? No matter what tool you use, no matter how you share content, try and give people that ownership to be able to maintain content themselves. And then you're going to find that every single tip that they get, every piece of information that they think is relevant is going to go in there. That's also where you're going to come in as L&D and say, oh, maybe not relevant enough, right? Maybe not everything's important, but that's one thing that we can deal with. Now, another question that we get, and this is, I think, the most asked question that we get actually when we think about how to scale, is how do I start? Right? Because I've had meetings with people that are so excited and they're like, yeah, I have, my team of SMEs, they're super engaged. They create training for absolutely everything already. So they're going to be super happy about this. I have my L&D team, they're ready to start. But then what is that first project? Or what are the projects that you can actually move into SMEs? And what are the projects that you're going to keep as learning and development? I have 3 categories. We found that these have the most impact when you start with those, with your scaling strategy. The first one is problem-solving microlearning. This is essentially that chat with the colleague that I was talking about. This is someone's stuck and then they need help or they need a fix now kind of thing, right? You most of the times don't know that information as L&D. You already have someone that's doing it in the organization. You already have someone that's doing it well, right? And we can use that information for many more teams, many more people. So, and I actually ask this to most SMEs that I work with. Normally they struggle with thinking about what their first project is. And I ask, okay, think about a question that you get once a week, a question that you get once a month. We're all experts on something. So people ask about where to find documents, what to do after a call, how to download a report, why that report is important, right? And they get that question over and over and over. So if you think about your subject matter expert, let's say, for example, they are a top performer in their teams, and they have to go through these questions over and over and over, then how much time are they spending, first of all, answering these questions? And also, how much time would they save if you just create something that you can replicate for not only their team, but maybe everyone that works with that software, right? So this is one that it's definitely going to have impact. If you want to try it out, I'm sure that it's going to be very, very successful. Another one is going to be challenge-based upskilling. And this is anything new, right? I'm jumping into a new role. I am using new tech. I need confidence on something, right? Again, there's someone that's already doing this super well. So why are we not using that information? For example, if you have, let's say, the sales example, you always have that top performer. They always get all of the bonuses. They are very, very good at what they do. But then all the other people in the team are like, okay, how do they do it? If you have that way of like sharing this information so that when someone steps into that role, they get information from the very best, which you already have, then that's the whole point, right? And you can just be there as, again, the coach. You can be there as the editor. You can be there to make sure that they're sharing information that's going to be important, but you don't have to make this information yourself. And I can assure you this is going to free up a lot of time to think about other things, to think about other projects, and to think about other ways of scaling. And then the other one is, curiosity snacks. Those questions of, I've always wondered how we do this. Again, there's someone that knows the answer. And if you don't have to know that answer yourself, then, even better. So if you work with any of these topics right now, if one of these topics is your main headache as learning and development, then I can assure you that it's really easy to take those into SMEs' hands and say, okay, run with it. And then, bring that information back to me. I'm going to make sure that you have what you need. And then let's publish that information and let's get that to people, right? And we can try this with a lot of different formats. So also when we think about SME, let's say made content, people think about boring content. People think about, that 60-slide presentation that I was telling you about. So how do we create content that is nicer to take from an SME perspective? And again, that's all guidelines. So for example, you're going to instruct your SMEs to create 3-step checklists. You're going to instruct your SMEs to create quick refreshers. You're going to instruct your SMEs to create 90-second, voice memos. Things that are going to be really easy to create, really easy to complete. And because they're going to have relevant information, because it comes straight from the SME, then people are going to be much more interested in what that course or that mini course says. I would also say, think about how easy it is to reuse that content every single time. When your SMEs are creating something, it doesn't matter if it's in one of these 3 categories or something else. Think about how easy it is for you to use that information in another course that you're making as a learning and development, because that's how you're going to start building that, let's say, content library that's really going to make things easier in the future. I actually have a story for this on how people are doing this with the partnership that we have with LearnUpon, right? And this is Gusto's story. So they had a lot of those issues that I was mentioning in the beginning. They had like a small learning and development team, and they had a lot of requests, and they didn't know how to start. They didn't know what to prioritize. They had a lot of teams, on their back, like essentially pushing them for content. So it wasn't really easy for them to deliver high quality content. And again, they weren't kind of like meeting all of the training requirements. So what they did from the Easygenerator side, for example, was they allowed anyone to make content in the beginning. I know this sounds very scary. But then they were kind of like trying to essentially understand who actually needed to make content. So they said, okay, you need to, create a piece of training on this. Go ahead. Right? Create it, share it back with me, then we can put it in LearnUpon, and then we're good. And then with that, they started kind of like refining their strategy. So now they have a team of consistent creators, right? And they don't have to do everything themselves. I actually don't know like the specific numbers for it, but I know they saved a lot of money. It's something like more than, I think, $1 million. So a lot of money. And they also reduced the content creation time in half. So if you can do that by just involving the people that already have the knowledge, then you're all set, because the hardest resource, which is knowledge, you already have. So we don't really have to worry about how we are creating all of this information. This already exists. We are worrying about how to track that information though. So what happened with them as well is most of the information was Google Slides. So again, you already know this, but you share the Google Slides show and you hope people look at it, and then you don't have any way of knowing if people actually completed this, or you have just that one check mark of I acknowledge that I've read, everything that we have in here. So they also use Learn-Upon for these purposes. They use Learn-Upon for better tracking. They use Learn-Upon to ensure that people were actually going through the training that they were making in Easygenerator. And because we have like a direct integration, people can do this with one click. So it is very simple for you to kind of like, or for anyone actually, to build content and push it onto Learn-Upon. And then of course you're going to be kind of like the overseers on that information and checking, you know, what's relevant, what's not, who should be taking what. But then you're going to give all the tools to the people that are creating the training and the people that actually have the information. And I actually have, we have people from Learn-Upon here. So I do want to bring them in because they have a lot more information on how Learn-Upon is going to work in terms of tracking. So Katie, go ahead.
Hello. So yeah, if you use Easygenerator, you can import your courses into Learn-Upon with a click of a button, and that will open up the course in a draft status, so you can add in any additional modules that you want to. And then when you're ready to publish it, you can just run a SCORM or XAPI interactions report, and you can capture all the interactions from that SCORM file.
Exactly. So then we have information from both ends. And again, it's something that you can do just with tech. You wouldn't need, you know, additional people to do this, at least additional people on your team. Now, I also have a more, let's say, practical framework that you can share with your SMEs on how to create better training. And this is all meant to replace that quick, 5-minute call that you have with your colleague. And this is what we call the Learn, See, Do framework. So essentially you have a problem or you have a challenge that you want to solve, right? And you're going to move that into information, into action, and then into application. So information is all of that content we already have. This is going to be the easiest step for you because you already have most of it, right? People already have it. So for example, you're going to use documents to build your training. Information is already there. Or maybe you're just going to allow your SME to create, a piece of content. So again, they already have the information. You're also going to be using AI at this stage. You might use it to, for example, maybe create something out of a document, which I think we've mostly done, at least, for example, if we are using AI in content creation. And you can also use AI to do all of those, boring, difficult tasks of summarizing information for learning, right? The things that, again, slow us down as people. Then you have the see option or the show option. And this is where you show how that information interacts with real life, right? Why that knowledge is useful, how they're going to be actually using this when when it comes down to it. This could be anything you want. This could be maybe a piece of interactivity, maybe, an interactive image that they click through. It could be maybe a video that they go through, right? It could be just something that shows why that information is important. And what we think is the most important part of this framework is why we're doing this, right? Why we're sharing this information and essentially how we apply it. So this could be anything. This could be a question. This could be maybe a scenario that your SMEs are going to make. The most important thing about how you train people and how they apply concepts is we have to make something that reflects real life situations. If you're not creating something that allows people to kind of like bring all of those abstract concepts together into, something practical, then they're not going to remember the information. And I know this is hard to you to listen or to hear too. Oh, okay. It's fine. I know this is hard to hear most of the times because we spend a lot of time making training, right? So the thing is, if you make training that's not relevant, if you make training that doesn't have real world application, people are not going to remember it, right? In the world of corporate learning, we don't learn to just know things. Of course, we all want to know. We are all, curious about different things. But we learn to do our jobs better, to do our jobs faster, to do our jobs in an easier way. And if your e-learning is not aligning with that in your learner's head, then they're not going to remember any of it. Doesn't matter how, fluffy your e-learning was. Doesn't matter if you had the best interactive piece in the world. Doesn't matter the hours of production that went into the video that you shared with them. if they don't find it relevant, again, this is why we're talking about speed, but also how relevant your content is, then it doesn't make sense. So we want to create those scenarios or those opportunities for people to actually practice knowledge. This could be online, this could be offline. If you can do it within the e-learning and then outside and maybe, I don't know, like a role play that you have, even better, right? But we want to do this as soon as possible because we have to prove to our learners that this information is worth their time. And I know this sounds a little bit, doomsday-ish, but, people don't really remember a lot of information these days. So if you want to kind of like stay in your learner's head, you really have to prove your worth. And this is what we're doing with this framework, right? This is what their colleague also does for them. They show them why that information is important, how to use it very quickly, and just, in the context that they need it. And this is what we're doing. I also wanted to show you a little bit of a video on how, for example, we can actually do this in Easygenerator, because I also think that it's very interesting for you to see how we actually get content done. So we have different options to create, but for example, we also have an option where people can drop in documents directly into the tool, and then we're going to ask some questions. And we wanted to create this kind of like as an L&D checklist. So again, we're thinking about, for example, who's going to be taking this. We're thinking about what information is important for them. We're asking people about length. That way you don't end up with like the 100-slide thing. And we're giving them suggestions based on the document from the get-go. So even if you have an SME that has never created a piece of learning, they've already had, some relevant information, they can come here and they can essentially build a course out of it. Now, it's not going to be a complete course. It's never going to be a complete course with AI, in my opinion, because AI is meant to accelerate. AI is not meant to automate, at least not in learning, right? And this is, again, what we were talking about of, my SMEs are the ones that have the information. AI is not going to be as relevant if it's not, let's say, modeled around what we want to share. So this is why we're asking these questions. And then we have a model, or we have kind of like a layout that's going to be built for people. We have, text, we have interactivity that comes straight out of your document. And then if your authors want, then they can go in and then, create more interactivity out of it. They can create questions out of it. They can, use AI to translate. They can use AI to build, voiceover out of this. So we are ensuring that we have all the elements that we need for a good course in terms of learning and development standards, but we're also ensuring that we get all the relevant content and all the speed that comes from a subject matter expert. Because if we can combine both, then that's it, right? We're going to have a system that works, and we're going to have a system that, of course, we can refine at any point, but this is what makes it so, let's say, easy to create that relevant content. You have to have a framework. For example, that's what we do in Easygenerator, at least. We have a framework, and then people come in and they use that framework to create anything they need. So I know that, some of you are creating courses on very specific topics. Some of you are creating general training. Some of you are creating, mostly leadership training. Some of you are from specific departments. The thing is, we all need that kind of framework. So this is what we aim to provide. We also have, of course, translation in different languages. That way we can also localize information. And this is also another way to scale, right? Maybe you're creating training for the US, but you have a team that's in, I don't know, France, right? And they're creating the same exact content you are. And you're doing it, twice, every single time. So if you can, let's say, create that content together, and then we can scale that content for other companies or for other, departments across the globe, that's even better. And then you're going to have integration. So you can essentially push that into Learn-Upon directly, and you're good to go. So this is how we think, we can do it. Oh, and I just played it again. There you go. Now, what we want to achieve when we think about creating content that's relevant, but most importantly, when we think about creating a system that is relevant, is something like this, right? So you have the same ecosystem, same exact thing. The thing is, now you're going to have your SMEs at kind of like the heart of the content creation process. So you can see that information moves within the business, right? And then as instructional designers, as L&D people, we are going to help them get the most impact out of what they're already making, because they already know the best piece of information in your company. You already have it. The thing is, it's hard to find, right? But if you don't have to find all of it, if you just have to kind of like guide people along the way, then that's going to make a lot more sense. And that's also going to give you time to do other things. Like, for example, this. So I have another story, and I think this ties everything up really, really good. And this is about something that happened a year ago. And this is a project that I was also coaching. We had a team of, let's say, support for a new app, right? And they were drowning in tickets, right? They were the help center for the app. They were drowning in tickets, and they were really, really struggling to meet demand. It was like a whole thing. Then L&D said, okay, we're going to create a training initiative so that people can, use this better, and then you're not going to have as much work, and then, so on. Because they also had the issue of people not being able to use the app correctly. So things were not going well. And then people, of course, they said, or, L&D said, okay, you need to start creating content about this and this and this thing, right? So they recruited kind of like the support team from that app, and they said, you're going to be building this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this. The thing is, when they received the information that they were going to do a lot more work, they weren't very happy about it, right? And this is another challenge that we get when we want to include SMEs into our content creation process. This is not their job, right? They already have a lot to do. Like, for example, this team. So what happened was they put in kind of like a metric to the center of this strategy. And this is something that if you're not creating content every single day, 8 hours a day, you're going to be able to do. They treated this as an initiative that had a metric inside. And that metric went beyond completion. Because, and I know this is hard to hear, we are so fixated on completion that we sometimes forget about other things. And completion is not a business metric, right? So what is the business metric that I'm moving with the content that I'm sharing? What is going to change in terms of behavior? How are we going to measure that something has impact? And if we're not thinking about the course that we're due, this week, then it is going to be easier for us to identify those things. So they picked this thing, which I realized that is very, very small on my screen. It's help desk ticket reduction. So when they started the project and they started getting like all of these complaints, they said, if you do this, if you push through and you create this content, then I can assure you that we're aiming for you to have less work, right? So then people, of course, were a little bit more convinced, and they started creating. And then after a couple of months, after they launched, we had a meeting to evaluate how this went. This was actually a meeting meant to promote Easygenerator for other people in the company. So I was there kind of like explaining how to use Easygenerator, so on. The thing is, when they mentioned that they had reduced the help desk tickets by 75%, I honestly thought that they were lying. I thought that they were being nice to me because I had to promote Easygenerator for people, and they wanted to, put a good face. And I was like, okay, thank you. I don't think this is real. But it was, right? No, actually, like, that was my reaction. I asked after. I was like, hey, thank you for this. But actually, like, what is the real number? So this showed everyone, right, myself included, but also kind of like the, support leaders, finance even, that this training was successful. So what we got out of this is that training is not a cost center. We have to define value. We have to be a lever. And if you can find those metrics that allow you to define value in a way that's as tangible as this, then that's the whole point, right? So if you can create content that, first of all, is easier to create for you, because you're not going to have to create, every single thing about it. If you can create content that is more relevant, if you can create content that goes faster to the people that, it needs to go, and you can create content that has strategy in mind, that has a metric, that has something that you're giving to the business, then that is going to be the perfect, well, there's no perfect strategy, but almost perfect scaling strategy, right? So I wanted to bring this in because it is the proof of like a lot of work, right? It was a lot of work, but it is also the proof of maybe having a different model that's going to work a little bit better, especially now that, for example, most of us are using AI in content creation. If we can use those tools to accelerate how we build, if we can use those tools to have less, let's say, mundane tasks, then we should. No one's going to look at your course and say, oh, that used AI to simplify information. I don't trust it, right? I'm not talking about AI building information from scratch. I'm talking about using it as a tool, but also creating tools for the people that are creating training. And hopefully, that's not going to be all you. Now, when we think about scaling, we normally think about all of the issues. We think about the chaos that we already have in our teams and how that's going to move to other teams and all that stuff. But I want you to think of scaling as something that's going to accelerate how you build content and something that's going to take you to essentially rethink the strategy that you have for content creation. We have to think about shorter training. We have to think about focused training, relevant training, even, for example, things like, accessible training, even more important, mobile focused training, right? So if we have time to think about these things, and maybe that those trainings are going to be drafted by SMEs, they're going to be elevated by L&D, and they're going to be accelerated by AI, then we should definitely take on that chance, because it is going to change and it's going to really improve how we make that content. Now, I do have a little bit of homework for you, not for now and not for tomorrow, because you're going to be in all the conferences, but I want you to think about the teams that ask you for training. I know you have them. I know you have one or two people in mind right now that come to you every single week with an initiative. They have an idea that's going to really help their team. If you can think of those two people, then you can kind of like shift the narrative a little bit more with them specifically, because they're eager to learn. And I can assure you they're already making things. If you're not going through their initiatives, if you're not helping them with their initiatives, they're already doing it on their own. So you can challenge them and you can tell them, okay, if you can create something that fits into a coffee break, something that's 5 minutes, something that has all the information that people would need without it being kind of like overpowering, then we can go through it. I can review it with you and we can push it into, for example, our Learn Upon system, right? And you can try it out. You can try it out with absolutely any topic. It doesn't have to be something that's like life-changing. You don't have to scale content for like the whole nation. It can be something that's really small, and that small piece of content is really going to change kind of like the way we think about scaling. So again, try it out. For now, you can start thinking about those people that ask you for training over and over and over, and then you can challenge them to create their own, and you can be their coach instead of their creator. And we'll see how it goes, right? So yeah, that's absolutely everything that I wanted to share. So thank you for coming in. Thank you.